First contact and fatal mistake. The Galactic Hegemony survey vessel emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Sol system, its crystalline hull refracting sunlight in prismatic patterns. Supreme Observer HFY stood on the command deck, their iridescent scales shifting from deep purple to electric blue, a sign of barely contained excitement. After millennia of undisputed rule over known space, they had finally found another spacefaring species showing signs of advancing beyond their planetary cradle. The humans, as they called themselves, had already established colonies on their red neighbor Mars and mining operations across their asteroid belt. Primitive by hegemony standards, but promising enough to warrant investigation. HFY's secondary hearts quickened at the thought of adding another species to their grand empire. The hegemony's approach had always been the same. Observe, evaluate, and if the species showed potential, guide them into the fold. If they resisted, well, resistance had been eliminated from the hegemony's lexicon eons ago. Analysis complete, Supreme Observer, announced First Analyst Vera, her crystalline exoskeleton humming with data streams. Their technology level is approximately classification D3. Nuclear fission, early fusion experiments, rudimentary AI systems. They've barely scratched the surface of quantum mechanics. HFY's scales rippled with amusement. Fascinating. They're like children discovering fire. Have they detected us? Negative. Our quantum shroud remains impenetrable to their sensing capabilities. The Supreme Observer moved closer to the observation window, studying the blue-green world that hung in space before them. Such a fragile-looking thing, yet teeming with life and potential. The hegemony's databases had already compiled extensive information about Earth's history, countless wars, rapid technological advancement, and an almost inexplicable ability to survive their own destructive tendencies. Their historical records indicate a peculiar trait. Vera continued, her crystalline fingers dancing through holographic data streams. They appear to advance most rapidly under pressure. Wars, disasters, and crises seem to accelerate their technological development exponentially. How primitive, HFY dismissed with a flutter of their ceremonial wings. Violence as a catalyst for advancement. They'll learn better under our guidance. But Vera's harmonic resonance, her species equivalent of a frown, deepened. Supreme Observer, I must note some concerning patterns. Their responses to external threats have been unprecedented in our records. When faced with superior forces, they don't submit as expected. They adapt, improvise, and enough. HFY cut her off with a gesture. Your concern is noted but unnecessary. We have guided thousands of species into enlightenment. Humans will be no different. They turned to their communications officer. Prepare the standard first contact package. Let's show them what their future holds. The message was sent, a spectacular display of holographic projections appearing in every major city on Earth. The hegemony announced itself with all the grandeur and ceremony that had worked countless times before. They offered humanity a choice: accept their benevolent guidance and join the galactic hegemony as a protectorate species, or face correction. The hegemony expected awe. They expected submission. They expected gratitude. They received none of these things. Instead, humanity's response came in the form of a unified broadcast, transmitted simultaneously in every known language the hegemony had included in their package. The message was brief, delivered by a silver-haired woman whose calm demeanor belied the weight of her words. We, the United Peoples of Earth, have received your message. We have studied our own history and know well the price of submission to self-proclaimed superior powers. We have no interest in becoming a protectorate. We extend an offer of peaceful cooperation between equals. Nothing less will be acceptable. HFY's scales shifted to deep red, a sign of rage among their kind. Unacceptable. The arrogance. They turned to their tactical officer. Prepare a demonstration. Target their Mars colony. Show them the price of defiance. As the hegemony's weapon systems powered up, Vera's crystalline structure vibrated with alarm. Supreme Observer, I strongly advise against this course of action. My analysis suggests the beam of concentrated energy that lanced out from the hegemony vessel never reached Mars. Instead, it collided with an invisible barrier, dispersing harmlessly into space. For a moment, absolute silence fell over the command deck. Then, all around the hegemony vessel, space itself seemed to ripple. Dozens of ships appeared, materializing from what should have been empty void. Human ships, their hulls covered in a material that had somehow masked them completely from the hegemony's advanced sensors. The silver-haired woman's face appeared on their screens again. This time, her expression was hard as steel. You came to our home and threatened our children. We gave you a chance for peace. Remember that. She paused, her eyes boring into Silax through the screen. Now, allow us to demonstrate why the choice was never yours to make. As alarms began blaring across the hegemony vessel, Silax realized with dawning horror that they had made a grave miscalculation. They hadn't found a primitive species ready for uplifting. They had awakened a sleeping giant. The hegemony's first lesson about humanity would be its hardest. Appearances can be deceiving. Humanity hadn't survived millennia of their own violent history by being weak. They had survived by being prepared. Always prepared. And the hegemony had just started a fight they weren't prepared to finish. The price of arrogance. The hegemony's response fleet arrived within days, emerging from hyperspace in a display of overwhelming force that had subdued countless civilizations before. 5,000 ships strong, their crystalline hulls forming patterns that turned space itself into an artwork of dominance. Admiral Kavol, Supreme Commander of the hegemony's correction fleet, stood aboard his flagship with absolute certainty of victory. Status report on the primitive defense forces. Kavol commanded, his bioluminescent patches pulsing with anticipation. Scattered readings. Admiral, his sensor officer reported. Their fleet appears to be retreating to their outer system. As expected, they realized the futility of resistance. Kavol's feeding tentacles curled in satisfaction. Supreme Observer Silax had been recalled in disgrace after the first contact debacle, but soon the natural order would be restored. These humans would learn their place, just as all others had. Deploy in standard subjugation formation, Kavol ordered. Begin the advance. But as the hegemony fleet moved forward in their perfect, practiced formations, something changed. The retreating human ships didn't break apart in panic as expected. Instead, they scattered in what appeared to be random directions. Except military minds as experienced as Kavol's recognized that true randomness rarely existed in combat. Sir, his tactical officer called out, crystalline structure vibrating with concern. We're detecting unusual energy signatures from the debris fields. Debris fields. Kavol's secondary brain pulsed with confusion. What debris fields? The answer came not in words but in action. The abandoned mining installations and orbital structures around Mars and the asteroid belt, installations the hegemony had dismissed as primitive and harmless, suddenly blazed to life. Each piece of what they'd assumed was space junk revealed itself as a weapons platform, their surfaces rippling as advanced camouflage systems deactivated. The human fleet hadn't been retreating. They'd been leading the hegemony into a killing field. Quantum-tipped missiles streaked out from hidden launchers. Not the crude nuclear weapons the hegemony had expected, but sophisticated devices that somehow tracked their ships through their quantum shrouds. The humans hadn't just been preparing for first contact. They'd been preparing for war. Impossible. Kavol's color bands shifted to emergency crimson. Their technological level was assessed at D3. These weapons are at least B1 classification. Sir, new contacts appearing throughout the field. The sensor officer's crystalline form was practically vibrating with panic. They're using the asteroids themselves as carriers. Massive hangar doors opened in what had appeared to be natural space rocks, disgorging swarms of smaller craft. Human fighters moved with impossible agility, their pilots pushing maneuvers that should have turned them to paste. The hegemony's perfect formation began to break as ships tried to adapt to an entirely different kind of combat than they trained for. "Stand firm," Kavol roared across the fleet command channel. "They are still primitives. We are the hegemony. We cannot be defeated by." His words cut off as a new weapon made its debut on the battlefield. Beams of concentrated darkness lanced out from several of the larger human vessels, and wherever they touched, hegemony ships simply ceased to exist. No explosion, no debris. They were simply gone, erased from space itself. "Voidlance technology," Keevel's science officer whispered in horror. "They'd weaponized quantum deletion, a technology we theorized, but never. All ships, emergency retreat." Cavell ordered, his proud bearing finally cracking. "Fall back tow." But the human fleet had no intention of allowing retreat. The scattered vessels suddenly moved with coordinated purpose, their seemingly random positioning revealing itself as a complex trap. They'd herded the hegemony fleet exactly where they wanted them. The space around the hegemony fleet rippled, and massive structures phased into existence. Containment pylons that began generating overlapping fields of distorted spacetime. The hegemony's hyperdrives went dark. Their quantum communications fell silent. They were trapped. Admiral Kavol watched in growing horror as the human fleet closed in. The silver-haired woman's face appeared on his command screen again, her expression now holding a hint of sadness along with its steel. "We tried to warn you," she said simply. "Humanity spent centuries fighting itself, advancing our technology in secret, preparing for the day we might meet someone like you. We knew that somewhere out there would be an empire that thought itself superior, that would try to subjugate us." Her eyes hardened. "You could have chosen peace. Instead, you chose to threaten our children. And now you'll learn why that was the last mistake the hegemony will ever make." As his fleet began to die around him, Kavol finally understood. The hegemony had thought they were descending from on high to teach primitive humans their place in the galaxy. Instead, they had walked into a carefully prepared ambush generations in the making. The price of their arrogance would be paid in full, and the receipt would be written in the shattered remnants of crystal ships scattered across the solar system. A warning to any other power that might think to test humanity's resolve. The game had changed, and the hegemony was playing by humanity's rules now. Turning the tide. The hegemony's High Council convened an emergency session, their crystalline chamber reflecting the chaos of their thoughts in fractured patterns of light. News of the fleet's destruction had spread through their empire like a quantum cascade failure, destabilizing millennia of carefully cultivated authority. "Impossible." Elder Zixtel's form pulsed with agitation, sending ripples through the chamber's resonant field. "How could they have hidden such advancement? Our observation protocols are infallible." First speaker Rylon, her crystalline form darkened with stress fractures, activated the central hologram. Images of Earth's history played out before them, but now viewed through a very different lens. "They didn't just hide their advancement," she explained, her harmonic voice tight with concern. "They weaponized our own assumptions. Every piece of technology they showed openly was a carefully crafted deception. Those primitive fission reactors, facades hiding antimatter production facilities, their crude satellites, quantum sensor arrays disguised as primitive communication relays. The images shifted to show human ships emerging from what appeared to be simple asteroid mining operations, complex shipyards that had been operating in plain sight, their true nature masked by technological camouflage beyond anything the hegemony had thought possible. While we watched them and judged them primitive, Rylon continued, they were watching us back, learning our weaknesses, testing our capabilities with subtle probes we mistook for random space debris or solar anomalies. They turned our entire surveillance network into a two-way mirror. The chamber erupted in harmonic discord as the council members processed this revelation. Their perfect system of categorizing and controlling emerging civilizations had been turned against them. Every assumption they'd made about humanity had been carefully engineered by humanity itself. But worse news was coming. "We've lost contact with our outer colonies," announced Military Commander Vexnor, his crystalline form crackling with stress. "Human ships have been detected in multiple sectors, but their attack patterns make no tactical sense. They strike without warning, targeting seemingly random installations, then vanish before our response fleets arrive." The hologram updated to show the extent of human incursion into hegemony space. There was no logical pattern to their movements, no clear line of advance that could be defended against. They were everywhere and nowhere, their ships appearing from what seemed like thin air to strike at vital infrastructure before disappearing again. "The humans call it asymmetric warfare," Relon explained. "Their historical records show they perfected it fighting among themselves. Every time a superior force thought they had the advantage, smaller forces would adapt, find weaknesses, and strike where least expected." "But how are they moving so quickly?" demanded Elder Zixtal. "Our sensor nets should detect any ships using hyperspace corridors." "Because they're not using hyperspace at all." Raylan's voice carried a note of horrified admiration. "They've developed something else, something we never even theorized. They call it quantum tunneling drive. Their ships don't travel through space. They simply cease to exist in one location and appear in another." The council chamber fell silent. Such technology shouldn't be possible. It violated fundamental laws of physics as the hegemony understood them. Yet the evidence was undeniable. "There's more," Commander Vexnor added grimly. "We're detecting increased activity among the subjected species in our core territories. The humans. They're sharing their technology, teaching our protectorate worlds how to resist us. Every world we thought safely subjugated is now a potential threat." The hologram showed scenes from dozens of worlds, former hegemony protectorates rising up, using human-provided technology to throw off their crystalline overlords. Centuries of careful control were unraveling in days. "We must sue for peace," Relon declared, her voice carrying the weight of terrible certainty. "Before it's too late." But even as she spoke, new alerts flashed across the holographic display. Human ships had been detected approaching the hegemony's capital system. Not in formation for attack, but in a clear message. They could reach anywhere, at any time. A transmission cut through all hegemony communications channels. The now familiar face of Earth's silver-haired leader appeared, but this time she was accompanied by representatives from dozens of former hegemony protectorate species. "Your empire was built on the assumption that technological superiority grants the right to rule," she stated calmly. "We've demonstrated the fallacy of that assumption. Now you face a choice. Adapt to a new reality where all species determine their own path, or face extinction. Unlike you, we're giving a genuine choice." The council members looked at each other, their crystalline forms reflecting the shattering of their worldview. They had thought themselves the galaxy's teachers, only to become its students in the harshest possible way. The tide hadn't just turned. It had become a tsunami, and the hegemony's only choice now was whether to swim with it or be swept away entirely. The hunter becomes the hunted. Deep in hegemony space, aboard the crystalline sanctuary world of Axis Prime, Supreme Coordinator Zyril watched his empire crumble through a cascade of emergency reports. The perfect order maintained for millennia was dissolving like quantum foam, and the architects of its destruction were proving maddeningly difficult to counter. "Another shipyard lost in the Cygnus sector," his aide reported, the being's crystalline form dulled with exhaustion. "The humans didn't destroy it. They converted the quantum control systems and turned it over to the local species we've been using as labor." Zyril's own crystalline structure vibrated with barely contained rage. This wasn't how conquest was supposed to work. The humans weren't following any of the established protocols of interstellar warfare. Instead of capturing territory or destroying military assets, they were systematically dismantling the very foundation of hegemony control. "Show me the pattern of their attacks," he commanded, activating the grand holographic display that filled the sanctuary's central chamber. But there was no pattern, at least not one that made sense to hegemony military doctrine. Human ships would appear without warning, bypass heavy defenses, and strike at seemingly random targets. A communication relay here, a cultural repository there, a bureaucratic center somewhere else. None of them purely military targets, but each one vital to maintaining the hegemony's grip on its subjugated worlds. "Sir," his aide interrupted, "we're receiving a priority transmission from the Orion Arm. The Vextari have declared independence." The Vextari. Zirel's color bands shifted to incredulous purple. They'd been our most loyal protectorate for 3,000 cycles. They help us suppress other rebellions. They're broadcasting a message across all quantum channels. You need to see this. The hologram shifted to show a Vextari elder, their insectoid features arranged in what Zirel recognized as their species' expression of resolve. Behind them stood a human delegate and representatives from a dozen other former protectorate species. "The hegemony promised us advancement," the Vextari elder declared, their translator rendering their clicks and whistles into standard galactic speech. "They offered enlightenment, but delivered only carefully measured doses of technology in exchange for our service as overseers. The humans have shown us what true cooperation between species looks like. They've shared innovations freely, asked nothing in return, except that we use them to help others gain their freedom." Zirel's secondary hearts nearly stopped. The Vextari had been instrumental in maintaining order across 3 spiral arms. Their defection wouldn't just mean the loss of their worlds. It would remove one of the key species that helped enforce hegemony control over dozens of others. "Sir," his aide's voice had shifted to a higher resonance of panic. "The Vextari are broadcasting the quantum encryption protocols. All of them. Every security measure we gave them to control their sector. Shut down the quantum net," Zirel commanded. "Lock out all non-hegemony access. It's too late." The humans. They're not just sharing technology. They're teaching every species how to reproduce and improve upon it. The quantum net is being decentralized faster than we can shut it down. Reports began flooding in from across the galaxy. Species that had been carefully kept dependent on hegemony technology were suddenly developing their own. Quantum barriers meant to contain primitive races were being dismantled. Communication channels the hegemony had used to maintain control were being turned into networks of cooperation between formerly isolated species. A new transmission cut through the chaos. The silver-haired human leader again, but this time she was standing in a location Zirel recognized with horror. The ancient Hall of First Contact, where the hegemony had first declared itself the galaxy's guiding civilization. "Your empire was built on a foundation of controlled scarcity," she declared. "You maintained power not through superior technology, but by carefully restricting access to it, by keeping species isolated from each other, dependent on you for advancement." She gestured to the representatives of various species standing with her. "We've removed that foundation. Every species now has the tools to determine its own path." Zirel watched in mounting despair as the transmission was picked up and rebroadcast by thousands of newly independent worlds. The humans hadn't needed to destroy the hegemony military. They'd simply rendered it irrelevant by giving every subjugated species the means to resist it. "Sir," his aide interrupted again, "we're detecting quantum tunneling signatures. Multiple human fleets, accompanied by ships of former protectorate species. They're everywhere. Every major hegemony world. Every administrative center. Every strategic choke point." The hunters had indeed become the hunted. But humanity hadn't just turned the tables. They'd rewritten the rules of the game entirely. The hegemony had sought to maintain power by controlling access to advancement. Humanity had broken that power by making advancement freely available to all. As alerts continued to flood in from across the galaxy, Zirel finally understood the full scope of humanity's victory. They hadn't just defeated the hegemony. They'd made its entire philosophy of controlled technological superiority obsolete. The age of the hegemony was over. And it had ended not with a bang, but with the quiet revelation that its power had been an illusion all along. A new order. One standard galactic year after the fall of the hegemony, representatives from over 1,000 species gathered in Earth's orbital assembly station. The crystalline architecture of the former hegemony administrative centers had been replaced by a structure that seemed to adapt its appearance to match the comfort needs of whoever was observing it. A testament to humanity's quantum environmental engineering. Admiral Sarah Chen, the silver-haired leader who had become the face of humanity to the galaxy, stood before the gathered assembly. Her aged features carried the weight of history, but her eyes sparkled with the same determination that had helped guide humanity's resistance against the hegemony. "We gather here not to establish a new empire," she began, her words automatically translated into thousands of different languages, "but to ensure that no empire can ever arise again. The hegemony's greatest crime wasn't their technology control, it was their suppression of possibility." The station's adaptive walls shifted to display scenes from across the galaxy. On countless worlds, species that had been kept carefully separated by the hegemony were now working together, combining their unique perspectives to solve problems that had stumped their former overlords for millennia. In just 1 year, Chen continued, free cooperation between species has produced more technological and social advancement than the hegemony managed in 1,000. They thought they were maintaining order. Instead, they were stifling the greatest resource in the galaxy, diversity of thought and experience. In the assembly chamber, former enemies sat side by side. The crystalline hegemony representatives, now stripped of their empire but welcomed as equals, found themselves engaged in earnest discussion with species they had once considered too primitive to address directly. The insectoid Vexteri shared engineering insights with silicon-based life forms from the galaxy's core. Hydrogen brothers and methane brothers collaborated through sophisticated environmental interfaces. But let us not repeat the hegemony's mistake of assuming technology alone marks advancement, Chen cautioned. Each species here has something unique to contribute. Whether it's art, philosophy, science, or perspectives we hadn't even considered possible. Our strength lies not in enforcing uniformity, but in celebrating our differences. A holographic display activated, showing the new quantum network that connected the galaxy. Unlike the hegemony's carefully controlled channels, this was a free-flowing exchange of ideas and information. Species shared their histories, their cultures, their dreams, and in doing so, began to understand each other in ways the hegemony had actively prevented. Some asked why humanity chose to free others instead of establishing our own empire. Chen continued, a slight smile playing at her lips. The answer is simple. We had centuries to study our own history. We saw how empires rise and how they inevitably fall. We learned that true strength comes not from domination, but from cooperation. Not from enforcing weakness in others, but from helping everyone achieve their full potential. The assembly chamber's adaptive architecture shifted again, this time displaying the edge of the galaxy. Strange signals had been detected from intergalactic space, perhaps other civilizations, perhaps new challenges that would require the combined efforts of all species to understand. The hegemony saw the galaxy as something to be controlled, Chen declared, her voice carrying across the chamber. We see it as something to be explored. They sought to prevent change. We embrace it. They tried to write the story of 1,000 species. We invite every species to write their own story. She gestured to the gathered representatives. The Galactic Concordat we signed today isn't a treaty of surrender or a declaration of human authority. It's a promise, from each of us to all of us. A promise to remember that strength lies in diversity, that advancement comes from cooperation, and that the greatest discoveries happen when different perspectives come together. As the representatives began the signing ceremony, the station's quantum cores hummed with activity. Each signature was not just a mark on a document, but a commitment encoded into the very fabric of space-time, a new kind of quantum contract that could be enforced not through military might, but through the combined will of all participating species. The hegemony had ruled through forced unity. The new Concordat would thrive through celebrated diversity. They had demanded submission. The Concordat invited contribution. They had feared change. The new order embraced it, and as the last signatures were recorded, humanity had achieved something far greater than military victory. They had sparked a revolution not just in technology or politics, but in how species across the galaxy saw themselves and each other. The age of empires was over. The age of exploration, both of space and of possibility, had begun. And this time, every species would help write the story of what came next. In the end, humanity's greatest victory wasn't defeating the hegemony. It was showing the galaxy a better way forward, not through force or control, but through the simple, powerful act of treating every species as equals with something valuable to contribute. The stars beckoned, and for the first time in galactic history, all species were free to answer that call together.